Hey everyone, and welcome to the new subject category results. So this photo we're going to look at right here, this is what I would have submitted were I submitting for this category. One day my wife and I were out on a hike and we were walking past this old abandoned mansion or house, I don't know what you classify it as. And this guy who I think said he was the owner saw us admiring it and was just like, yeah, go on in, take photos of the inside, that's fine. I would have submitted this for this category because I don't do urbex photography and I honestly don't like going inside of abandoned places. And here we are taking a photo in the basement of black mold climbing up the wood paneling. It was so terrifying down there. At any rate, this whole building was gross. It was kind of like this throughout. Anyway, but it was a neat experience and one that I am glad I can check off the list and not repeat. So at any rate, so the idea of this prompt was to submit photos that were of subjects that you had not photographed before. So last video we went in alphabetical order. This time we're going to go in reverse alphabetical order for all of these. And we're going to start here with a photo from Mengle, and this is a photo of, looks like a wetland or a swamp or something like that. And one of the things I've struggled with this image is what's the subject? This is a matter of personal opinion, and I'm open to the possibility that there are definitely photos where this wouldn't be the case, but I tend to think that the strongest photos have a clear subject. Okay, so even if we take another quick look at the one that I just showed you of my entry for this, has a pretty clear subject, which is to say the damage to that interior space is the subject of that photo. But with this one, I don't have a clear sense of what the subject for this photo would be. And so that was one of the things that I struggled with it. This next photo comes from Hancock, and this is a photo of a person playing soccer. It looks like they're just on a street, right? With a skateboard in the background. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this is the way that the angle is used in this photo. Because imagine this photo if it were perfectly level. Okay, if we had some magical way to add to rotate it and add back the things that are outside of the frame, like the corner of the shoe on the right and some things like that, I don't think it would be as interesting a photo to look at. Having this photo be at what is obviously an angle, not just something that's slightly off, so might be a mistake, but this is a pretty obvious significant angle, makes it feel like we're in the moment, right? Like we're watching this as it happens, because things that we're participating in as they happen, not necessarily going to be perfect. And then having this at an angle is also a little bit disorienting, again, making it not really quite perfect. So this is one of those cases where having your horizontals be perfectly horizontal maybe wouldn't necessarily help the photo. And so good eye for looking at a way to compose this, which forces the viewer to be part of the action. This photo comes from Boesky, and if I recall correctly, this is the only photo from his portfolio that isn't of people, which tells me that cars are probably a new subject to him. It's a decent looking car, I won't lie. So there is a really good use in this image, like focus is spot on, right? And exactly what should be in focus is there's a really nice use of color and shape and overall composition, right? One of the things about car photos, though, is that when you've got a shot like this, it looks like this is a somewhat wide lens. And, you're standing a little bit above the car pointing down, which you can see by the vertical lines over on the left side of the image, and just the fact that you can see a little bit more of the hood, that what we're getting a photo of is the grille and some like distortion of the image, right? A distortion of the shape of the car. So while there are a lot of technical aspects of it, right? Like the question walking away from this photo is, what should I have taken away from that photo of the car? So imagine if we were to reshoot this, right? We've got those cars over on the right side. Those could be a really distracting element. But if we got over on what would be the passenger side of the car, and we took a step back and we put the camera down really low, right? Then shot upward, you'd have more of a hero shot, and you wouldn't get the cars in the background, in theory, because they'd be blocked by this bright red Genesis. And then you get more of the angles of the side of the car. So it'd be worth, cars are a subject that are really well suited for the one role, one subject category, which we'll look at later on, because you can easily photograph an entire roll of film on them and then experiment with different angles, what's flattering, detail shots that work or don't work, things like that. And then one of the other things in here that stands out a little bit as, hey, that caught my eye, is right in the middle of the image where that, I'm guessing eventually license plate will go, is a reflection of the photographer. That is really hard to get away from in car photos, and it's one of the things whenever I photograph a car that I struggle with, is trying to get in an angle where me holding the camera isn't reflected in the shiny parts of the car. So probably why I really like photographing old jalopies, because there's nothing shiny left on them. Anyway, it's just another thing to be a little bit aware of. And it's another thing that indicates that this is, in fact, actually a legit new subject for the photographer. So cars are their own unique beast when it comes to photographing, and they are, for cars like this especially, ones that are really nice, also a lot of fun to photograph. So I do like this photo, and I do think there's a lot of really interesting things going on with it. Just think that approaching it from this car from a different angle could have made it a more successful finished result. This next shot comes from Rod Stewart, and this is a photo. This looks like a pinhole photo. I'm going to guess that this is taken on a pinhole camera, given the longer exposure, which we can see in the waving of the flag, the light loss around the peripheries, and then the general softness in the image. And I don't think this is his only pinhole photo in this contest either. So, interesting image here in the way that it's structured, because we've got, of course, we're generally speaking bound to a square or rectangular frame for images. It's kind of hard to have a different frame shape. And even though I know the first Kodak reusable cameras from the 1800s had circular frames. Anyway, getting away from that, what we have is a square frame with all of these curves. Generally speaking, everything in this image is somewhat curved, all of the structure except the flagpole. We've got the railings, we've got the landing or whatever it is that they're attached to. They're all curved, and they curve through this rectangularly shaped image. And then we've got the sky, which is really just, in essence, a bunch of converging lines going towards the center of the frame, as shown by the movement in the clouds. So one of the things that's interesting then in that convergence is the fact that the curved lines and the flagpole go opposite of that convergence. So this is also a way of playing with different shapes within multiple different shapes within the same structure. This next shot comes from Frank Wouters, and this is a really interesting way of combining motion blur, okay? Because you've got multiple different motion blurs going on in here. If you look at the background of the image and the dirt, we've got this sideways motion blur of the camera being tracked as this, what I'm assuming ATV, is moving left to right. Then also within the ATV, it's clearly moving up and down on this terrain because we've got motion blur within the structure of the ATV, and we've got different shapes of motion blur, whether it's one or two motorcycles or ATVs, I can't tell, which is due, I think that's intentional and also due to the motion blur. But you've got the motion of the wheels, and then the body of the motorcycles or ATV are bouncing up and down differently than the wheels, and then the riders have a slightly different motion, and then juxtaposed with that horizontal motion. Really, I think, visually interesting image to look at. So good job on that, Frank. So this next shot comes from Stephen Boyce, and it's a photograph of a tree with an open space in the background, right? And then, interestingly, a little bit of frame from the negative around it. I'm going to assume that that's intentional. What I'm not sure about is why it's there or what it has contributed to the image other than a frame on the upper left-hand side. So, really good use of tone across the entire zone system, all of the zones here, going from very, very dark shadows to some brighter highlights, both in the tree and then in the background as well. And then the tree, of course, being in very sharp detail with really good resolution of the tree and then into the foreground as well. That's, this is something you don't see in a lot of landscape photos, is foreground to nearby subject being in focus with distant being out of focus. You do get that sometimes, but it's not a technique that's used as often as, say, maximum distance and grand vistas, right? So I think this is an interesting way to approach the structure of a landscape photo, and an interesting way to look at the way that an image of this nature could be structured. It's important as artists, whether it's in photography, writing, music, or painting, whatever art form, to ask, what if? What if I did this thing differently? What could I do that I haven't tried that could make something like this different? Because if we don't consistently as artists ask ourselves, what if I did this thing differently? Our work's going to become stale and repetitive. This shot comes from Milan Cetic, and it looks like it's a photo of a person who is sunbathing, and possibly like a sneak shot, like, I'm going to walk past and I don't want them to know I'm taking a photo, so that's why everything's just a hair blurry on this, and it's got some motion blur to it. And because that rock has that same motion blur, we know that the camera's moving and not just the dock or whatever they're sitting on moving in the waves, right? This was an image, I'm certain that it fits the prompt of a news subject, which is to say, photographing somebody when they don't realize they're being photographed. I'm assuming that's what the news subject is. And I think the overall image composition is pretty good. And honestly, the motion blur doesn't really bother me all that much in this image, but it does become a bit of a distracting element in the person, because whenever we see a photo with a person, we're just by nature drawn to looking at that person. And if the subject had been in sharper resolve, even if everything else was blurry, I think that would have been a little bit more successful, because right now it feels like there was just a bit of a technical mistake made when taking this photo, even though I'm pretty sure that it was that there were some intentional choices here. This photo comes from Eduardo Monteiro, and this is a photo of a building. And we know it was taken last year. This is a photo of a building with the sky above it. And so I'm assuming that the new subject is architectural photography. I do like detail photos for architecture, as we'll talk about probably in every video for this year's contest. And I think that detail shots can do some really interesting things, right? If you can find a detail in a building that tells you something about the entire building, then you're taking something small and telling a larger story. And that's, generally speaking, a really successful way to take a detail shot, whether it's of a building, a car, a person, any object that we could take a photo of. Okay? So the only thing I would look at, if it were possible to go back and take this photo again, is look at the way the bottom part of the frame is composed, because you've got a couple of trees down there that are a little bit cut off, which is a bit weird. And then also, it looks like the camera was at a slant when this was taken, because of the way that some of the verticals in the support structure in the very bottom are slanted off to the side. So those are the only technical things that I'm noticing right off the bat. I really do like the choice of this section of the building to use as the photographic subject, because in the way that the image is otherwise structurally composed. Because the sky is just a bunch of negative space. It's got interesting color and texture, but it's functionally negative space. It's a shape. Then the building itself, it's a very interesting shape and a very interesting texture. It's concrete with these 3 outcroppings for windows, which just cast these interesting shadows and things like that. So the choice of the part of the building to photograph was also very well selected. This photo comes from Tim Peters, and it's a photo of a building front. And there is a large format photography tradition of photographing doors and building fronts and things like this, and then having them be detail shots of architecture that are designed to tell the story of the whole building. I do this a lot myself, whether I'm shooting large format or digital as well, is that if I see an interesting building front, I think it's a really neat thing to photograph. This one really stands out as interesting. So some of the interesting things going on with the composition, it's all pretty much square with the exception of the number, the 708, the 2 overhead lights, the lamp above the door, and that half circle design element over to the right. But the rest of the image is really made up of rectangles or things that have strong angles in them. Okay, and so compositionally, there's this working of predominantly harsh angles mixed with a handful of round angles that are really interesting elements. But then we know that there's something about this building, right? Like the call box over on the left. That's a very old looking call box. And then the 708, that's an older letter numbering style that was more popular with buildings in the U.S. Some decades ago. The same thing with that lamp style. That's a little bit of a slightly older lamp style, although I guess actually you can still see them on fairly new buildings. Anyway, but then we go beyond the elements of the building that look a little bit older. Then we've got what looks like, if it's not a reflection, literally a piece of roofing material behind the window, which might indicate that the building's shut, like somebody has put that there to keep people from being able to go into this abandoned space. And then over on the left side, we have this plaster breaking off and revealing a very interesting bit of brickwork. That tells us that plaster breaking off tells us there hasn't been a lot of maintenance done on this building in the recent past. But those different colors of bricks, the white ones up near the top, indicate that there is something else, indicate something about the bricks that's behind the plaster. Is it a sign, or is it different colors of bricks? It's impossible to say. But the plaster over this, or the finishing material over the outside of this building, has hidden something about this building's history from us, and that history is trying to make its way through the exterior of the building. So I think it's a fascinating way to take a still image here and tell a story about a building. This photo comes from Rich Mander, and I do love pigs. They are adorable. Steinbeck also loves pigs. We went camping, and there was a pig in the campground. There were like 3 pigs in the campground this past summer. I'm amazed by how human pig eyes look, right? And so one thing we talked about in the last video with the cat photo, and we'll talk about again in another video with another cat photo, is when you photograph an animal, like when you photograph a person, is making sure that the predominant eye, in this case the dominant eye, would be in focus. With this, we've got what would be the eyebrows, and then the eyelashes are in sharp focus, and then the eye behind what is the pig's left eye, the one on the right side of the image, is slightly out of focus. This would be a very, very hard photo to get from this angle and have that eye be in focus because it's behind those eyelashes. And cameras are going to, generally speaking, if they even the most advanced brand new ones, are going to hone in on higher contrast areas to be in focus if there isn't an obvious animal or person face. Even with a brand new camera, professional grade camera, I think the result of this image would have been the same. The autofocus would have gone to the same place because the bars break up the face of the pig and the eyelashes cover it. So this would have been a case where a manual focus, switching to manual focus, may have given better results. I'm going to guess that this was taken with autofocus. So if I'm wrong on that, I'm sure that Rich will let me know. But other than that, beyond that one, what is easily rectifiable technical issue, one of the things that I really like about this image is the fact that the pig is behind these really serious bars. These are not bars that are meant to give the pig any illusions that it's getting out. That pig is trapped. Those are thick bars. So the message of this image is that this pig is stuck in this cage. And look, if you look at the blurry parts of that cage, it doesn't look like the most pleasant place to be. It's literally over an open pit, which means that when that pig goes to the bathroom, then that stuff's just automatically going to be treated by falling through those slats. So this is a pretty industrial facility. And I think that the message in this image, which is of this pig being stuck there, is, I think, a really resonating one, and one of the reasons that I liked this image a lot. It's very easy to get all of the technical things right in an image. It's not easy to create an image that tells a story about the subject and that in some way resonates with the viewer. So to that end, the most important parts of this image are done very well. This photo comes from Randall Dunphy, and this was taken with a drone, judging by the title of the photo, which is drone photography. And so I assume in this case that the new subject is the property that's being photographed, or it could be that this is one of his first drone photos. So drones, generally speaking, have like wider angle lenses, right? And so with this photo, you can see the horizon sort of bends downward. And that's most pronounced in the clouds, but even the general horizon line at the base of the mountain sort of bends downward, which indicates that this is a very wide angle, flirting with fisheye lens. Steinbeck, you will not be hungry for 45 more minutes. I hear you. You will not be hungry for 45 more minutes. Yes, I know. I love you too. You're a good boy. Steinbeck, go play with popcorn. Go play with popcorn. That's why we got you popcorn. So that when you get bored, you can go play with popcorn. Go on, she is in the other room waiting for you to play with her, Pop. Let me finish this video and I will cook you dinner. Not cook you, I will get your dinner out of the tub on the patio. Yes. All right. I completely forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, so one of the things that drone photography gives us the ability to do is photograph things in a completely different manner. We can take high-up shots where there's no infrastructure to take a high-up shot, which is what's going on here. And I think that it's a really interesting perspective on whatever this foreground space is compared to those mountain backgrounds. You can also, when you're high up, you can tilt the camera downward and take things from the top down and things like that. So I think that having drone, I wish I could pilot a drone. I have tried to learn to do it and have crashed multiple drones in the pursuit of learning how to do it. But I really do have a bit of envy for somebody who can pilot a drone well, because it opens up all manner of very, very interesting subject compositions that are otherwise completely unattainable. So keep up the good work with the drone photography, Randall, and I think this is a really neat perspective on a subject that would otherwise perhaps not be quite as interesting to photograph. This photo comes from Gabriel Silvaz, and it's a photo of an army soldier. So one of the things when it comes to toy photography, and I'm going to come at this as somebody who is not a toy photographer, by the way. There are some really amazing toy photographers who create dioramas for their subjects and who really treat their subjects in interesting and creative ways. But I think the best tip I could take away from what any of those really amazing toy photographers do is that they treat their action figure or human figure subjects like actual people. So, for instance, this photo could be really successful if we treated the subject like a human, right? So one of the things that if you were to take your the action figure and then try this again, imagine photographing him face on, right? Shoulders up, face on, like this was a portrait shoot for a person. Okay, what if we took him outside and put him into different settings, such as if you had, so he's got the airborne patch. What if you gave him something like a backpack and then had some strings coming off of it and had a close-up, and you could hang the strings from like a tree branch or something like that. So you would have a close-up where it would look like he was parachuting into a forest. Or you could put him in like some bushes, sort of camouflaged with some mulch, something like that. And so this is more of going with the idea we talked about earlier of what if. What if I did something else? What could I do? So I think it's always any subject can be made to have interesting visual photographic appeal. It's just a question of looking at it and saying, what else can I do? What more? How far can I push myself that I haven't yet tried to do? There are some things in this image that could work really well for that. So imagine if we had turned this soldier 90 degrees to face us, and we had that same background. Now we would have a really interesting portrait instead of just a really interesting profile. And we would have a little bit more active engagement between the subject and the viewer. As it is right now, what we've got is the subject looking off at the edge of the photo. So if this were a real person, the fundamentals of the image really wouldn't change because they'd still be engaged with something else and not even indirectly engaged with us. If you think back to, I think it was yesterday, we had the street photo of the accordion player. The accordion player wasn't engaged with us, but he was looking in, his face was pointing in the photographer's general direction, even though his eyes were off towards someone else. So there was an engagement with his face, right? That photo would not have been nearly as successful if that accordion player had been in profile. So I do think it's there's a lot of skill that goes into a subject like this and doing it really well, and that these are subjects which are really worth exploring in interesting ways as well. So it's just a matter of looking at what could we do and how can we expand our horizons regardless of what the subject is. This photo comes from David Cockerill, and it looks like it's a leopard or a cheetah, tiger. I'm not sure which. That's probably in a zoo setting. I have no opposition to taking photos of animals in zoos. I think it's a really good way to get photos of animals we would probably otherwise never get to photograph. So this looks like it was probably taken with a relatively decent telephoto lens, given in terms of focal length, given the depth of field here and the general image characteristics of the background and the foreground. So one of the things I would note with this image is if you look at the cat's face, the cat's head, the cat was probably moving fairly quickly in this image because its head has already moved through the plane of sharp focus. So right now where the cat's standing with that grass that's in the sharpest focus is its third leg back. The one of its rear legs that's in front of the other one. And so its hip ends up being in sharp focus. Animals are so hard to photograph for this reason because they move so quickly. this past summer, I had a gig photographing dogs for the school, for the training school that we take Steinbeck to. And I did 2 shoots and with an A7 IV that I rented. And when I got it, it had 23 photos, I think, on it. And when I sent it back, it had 10,400 photos on it. I was the first person to use it, and I put it through its paces. So, but of those 10,000 photos, 140 of them went to the school as finals, because animals are that hard to photograph. I just put it in burst mode. It's like, I know that I'm going to put it in burst mode, and I'm going to shoot 25 photos, and 2 of them are going to turn out. 25 photos of this dog doing this obstacle. And so it's just a different approach to things, because animals require us to predict in advance where they're going to be. And there's 2 ways to do that. You can either say, I'm going to try and actively track focus and predict where this animal's about to go, or I have a really good idea of where this animal's going to go. I'm going to preset my focus to a point on that track where the image composition looks pleasing, and then just burst mode as it walks through that point, and accept that of these however many photos, 2 of them at most will be good. So but other than that, if we're talking about the image composition and the image structure, one thing I would look at with this photo is, what if we cropped out the fence? Let's assume that we had gotten the cat in perfect focus, right? If its eyes were right there in sharp focus. What if there was no fence in the background? I think that would strengthen the image, because right now the cat's bottom half of the image. Getting rid of that fence would mean the cat would be top third. And because it's got that little bit of dirt in front of it and that little hill between the photographer and the cat, that gives the cat more space in terms of a percentage of the frame to walk through as it's walking through this frame. Right now, as a percentage of the frame, the path for the cat is not all that much. So it's just another point on this is that an image crop can also completely change your composition in ways which are really beneficial to the overall image structure. From Lukasz, I'm going to apologize again for not being able to get your last name. I'm just going to ask you why you would dare to build this in front of my OSHA handbook. This is this is amazing. I'm not going to lie. I looked at this, I just thought that was fantastic. So we've got this homemade, gotta imagine it's fairly homemade, caterpillar with 3 big puffy wheels and some metal planks that are looks like it's probably towed behind something for moving dirt or something like that through muddy ground. I think that is a very cool piece of equipment that would actually have gotten us in a ton of trouble back in my construction days. Anyway, so one of the things I really like about this photo is when you see something interesting, photograph it. And when you see something that's not interesting, photograph it. But photographing interesting things will get you into the habit of photographing more things. You know, if you stop along the roadside while you're driving someplace and you're like, I have time. There's a road grader or a steamroller or something like that parked off to the side of the road. I'm going to photograph it because I have a few extra minutes, and then I'll have a few photos to show from it. And however those photos turn out, I'm going to learn something from that experience, even if that learning is just the discipline of taking a photo at the time that you can take it. Because when you drive home that same route, that thing that was interesting might not be there anymore. So I think it's a good instinct to stop and see something neat and photograph it. This photo comes to us from Carlos Diaz, and this is a detail shot of a boat, probably an old tugboat or fishing boat, hard to say. I am far from a boat expert. But this detail shot gives us a pretty solid hint that this boat is permanently out of service, right? It's not heavily damaged, but there's a bunch of stuff leaning up against it that probably wouldn't be leaning up against it if it were floating in the water. So this boat's probably on its way to be scrapped and reclaimed. So one of the things I really like about this image is the way that the boat's structure is used within the frame. Okay, you can see that there's more to the boat because it's not all in the frame, but there are some really interesting detail elements about this boat. You've got the ribs at the back of it. You've got this horizontal line, the holes that were used for water to drain off of the deck. You've got all of this dark, it's probably like mold growth or bacteria growth where that water had been dripping off of the boat surface. And then you've got this interesting older style of boat conning tower or pilot's room, whatever it is, where that isn't really used anymore. This looks like it's a 70s style boat. And it's just old shapes like that. They're not made anymore, right? And they're interesting because there are fewer of them left. We see them less often, and old shapes for things that have been built can be really interesting to photograph because they force us to look at shape and form in a different manner photographically. And so one of the things that I've really liked about the structure of this image is that it is looking at the different shapes and forms of the boat versus what we would see, say, in a newer boat. And it looks at how could the shape of this boat complement the structure of this image. This photo comes from Lukasz Apte, and this is a photo of, well, I don't know what that is. I thought maybe it was a lifeguard tower, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe it's just a light on the shore to keep boats from crashing into it. I do think it's interesting that it looks kind of like a Christmas tree. One of the things, so there's a lot in terms of like the basic composition and things like that are going well here. Level horizon, very good. Horizon is roughly at one of the rule of thirds marks, good instinct as well. And also you've got the tree there, left of center, almost one of the 1/3 marks. So this is kind of structured in a way that's reminiscent of a rule of thirds structure. Rule of thirds is a long-standing, very successful structural method because it works and creates pleasing images. And you know, a lot of the photographic rules that have been around for a century or so have been around because they consistently prove themselves to work. And so as you can see in this image, with something that roughly follows the rule of thirds, you've got an interesting subject over on the left, and then the rest of the image becomes different elements that complement that subject. And they're different shapes and colors and things like that. The sky has a big amount of negative space. We're not really going to focus on that because we're not drawn to it. It's just sky and clouds. What's really interesting is the way that the water moves through the frame because it's all in the bottom third-ish, and it moves through in an angle that draws our eyes to this light thing over on the left side of the frame. And then we have the shape of the rocks on the beach, which are angling down towards the water. And so when our eyes move past that light, then they're kind of pulled back toward it by the rocks. And so that's a really good structure that uses the shapes within the image to keep the viewer's eyes in the image so that we look at it longer. Now the last of these before we get into the honorable mentions comes from Ali Tarlani. And this is a photo of a necklace on a black background. It looks like this was taken on construction paper. Not a complaint by any means, by the way. You've used construction paper for many black backgrounds. With a single lighting source off to the left, but also we know, because we can see the front of this pendant, that there's a secondary dimmer lighting source off to the right. So this is a really fascinating use of light with this photo, because we have light creating shadow and we have light not creating shadow, and that's very, very hard to do. There's got to be a light to the right, otherwise we couldn't see that pendant. But where's the shadow from it? Where's the shadow? We don't have one. And what that tells us is that the light that's off to the right is substantially dimmer than the light that's off to the left. And so the light that's off to the left, that light is bright enough that it has canceled out the shadow cast by the light that's off to the right. Okay, so this is a really good and advanced use of light And I think it's a really successful product shot in that regard because it shows a lot of technical skill. If there were anything I were going to change with this photo, it would be the darkness of the black areas, right? Because you can still see like this texture, or what looks like a paper texture, but could be a fleece or fabric texture. It's really kind of hard to say for sure throughout that dark area. It might be worth trying with either adjusting your levels in RAW or bracketing your shots to try to see if it were possible to get those dark areas slightly darker. Because right now, just having that added texture sort of gives the viewer something else to look at in the image. And when you're talking about a really minimalist product shot like this, the product is what you want to have the viewer's eyes focus on solely. All right, let's take a look at the honorable mentions, and we have 5 of these today. And we'll start here on the going alphabetical up this time. We're going to start with Dymtryo Chaika, another photograph from Ukraine, and we can see the damage to what I'm assuming is a residential structure here. We can see that there's a bit of a playground in the foreground of it, and then this building which clearly has been partially collapsed. For me, the playground is what makes this image, right? And one of the reasons this is an honorable mention instead of being first or second place is that the playground didn't jump off the image at me at first. The story of this image is the fact that there is a playground here, because the playground tells us that this is a place where families with children lived, okay, and spent their time, long enough time that the children grew up here playing on this playground. So let's imagine a recomposition of this image, which is pretty good, by the way, aside from the playground being too small of an image element. We have a lot of space up on the top, above the crane. Everything above the crane could go. And then we have a little bit of foreground space on the bottom below the teeter-totter and what looks like a couple of tires. That could go as well. So if we took the camera position and we moved it up about 8 or 10 feet, this looks like a pretty wide-angle lens. What we could then do is have those playground elements take up round about a third of the frame at the very bottom, and then the middle third would be that destroyed part of the building, and then the top third would be what's left of the roof with the crane, or with the crane, is it a wrecking ball? I can't tell, over that part of the building. And so it would change the weights of the image elements, because right now, what are the most important, the most dominant image elements in this frame? The tree on the left and the tree on the right. Everything else is playing second fiddle to those because they're in front of everything else and blocking our view from some of this. So if we moved up toward the teeter-totter and those tire things over on the right and down, and we took some steps forward, took some steps to the right, and moved the camera down as far as we could get it to keep those playground elements in the frame, then that would force the building behind it to be a more dominant part of the background, probably cut most, if not all, of that tree out of it, and then it would become playground, building, crane. So I think that the image elements in this photo are there, but that just a different perspective could have amplified and changed the balance in a way that told a different story. This photo comes from Samuel West, and this is a photo of cyclists. We've seen motion blur earlier in this video. This is another really good use of motion blur because that cyclist's face is not blurred. This is not an easy photo to get because the cyclist's legs, his bike's spokes, his arms, there's motion blur there, but not in his face. So what does that tell us about this image? What it tells us is that this is a digital photo, and there was motion tracking or anti-shake turned on, and the autofocus honed in on his face and then moved the sensor to make sure that that was in focus and sacrificed the rest. That's a really good way to use autofocus and image stabilization to improve sports photography because it keeps the thing of most visual interest, the subject's face, in sharp focus. And then the blurriness of the rest of the motion of the camera, which we can see in the background there, and the motion of the subject, which we can see in his legs, arms, and his tires spinning, amplifies the intensity of the motion in the image. So good job in the use of the tools in that way to create the story and amplify it, and also in the way that the light in this image works, which I didn't touch on, but this subject's in shade, but he's still really well illuminated. The background's not blown out. The shadows aren't completely lost. So also from a technical perspective, really successful image. From A.D. King, we have, I think, the most minimalist photo of the entire contest here, which is boils this scene down to two tones, black and white. It gives us enough detail to see that there is, I'm assuming that this is either like outside of a tub or something like that. We've got this like textured rubber surface, and then this tile wall going up, and then the shape of this tile wall, which is a curve that's sort of working with all of these straight lines as well, but the straight lines are forced to take on a curve. So from any other angle, this photo would not have worked, because the really interesting parts of this photo are the white and the dark, the way that the straight lines become curved, and then without those sandals, this photo wouldn't have worked either, because then it would have just been shape and form, and it wouldn't have had that visual appeal and interest of somebody who wears Michael Kors sandals being probably in this tub. So in addition to being shape and form, there's a story here that we know that somebody else is somewhere tangential to this frame. So really very solid and very great image here. Like this one a lot. This next shot comes to us from Sunny Xiao, and this is a photo of a lamp in ice. And you can see the way that the heat from the lamp is melting the ice slowly around it, and really loved the way that this photo used light and dark, texture and temperature. Like, this is a photo that absolutely puts you in the scene. It makes you an active participant standing there looking at this lamp that's got this ice around it that's slowly melting away. In addition to that, the image composition of the way that the light comes through the ice and the way that the ice melds into the shadows, almost melts into it really, I think is just an absolutely beautiful use of all of the different image elements within this frame. This last honorable mention comes from Ted Smith, and this is a really great use of fast shutter speed. There is no blur anywhere in this image. Look at the water droplets. There's no blur in those water droplets. The subject of the person is frozen absolutely in motion. This is a very fast shutter speed. I'd be hesitant to guess what it is, although I would say it is probably no slower than a 2,000th of a second, because if you look at the small water droplets in the image, those are the ones that are going to be most noticeable to have a little bit of blur, even at 1/1000th of a second, and there is nothing there. So, also, one of the things that's really great about the way that this photo is structured is you're in the water with the subject. Like, this is not a photo that was taken from shore. It could have been taken from a dock or a boat or something like that. We don't know. But it certainly feels like I'm standing there watching this kid swim in the water. It's a photo that puts you absolutely in the frame with the subject. That's something a lot of photos don't do. And it's a really good instinct, especially with sports photography, to do that. So really great use of camera placement and the technical aspects of freezing motion with this photo. All right, second place, the runner-up, comes to us from Garrett Dennington. And we saw another photo of this building, and we'll see more photos of this building throughout the week. This was, I think, a really stunning use of the square format to capture a rounded building, but also it shows the building in its setting, which is that it's got some natural grasses around it. And so you also have, in addition to all of the things we talked about in the last video with this building, you've got the combination of the it's not an industrial building, but you've got this man-made built structure placed into a natural environment. And you've got those two things married right next to each other in this photo. And also the way that this photo is structured, the way that it captures this part of the building, I think is absolutely stunning and just really, really well done. This is a fantastic image and just really nails all of the things we talked about in the previous video when it comes to this subject. Which leaves us with this category's winner, Andrej Bjelakovic, and it's a photograph of a guitarist at a concert. I don't know who the guitarist is. It does not matter, because this is a great photo. It's got a couple technical imperfections, right? Like the guitarist's face is slightly past the plane of sharpest focus, which is on the guitar's strings. But this is the grittiness of the film that was used in this photo, plus the hint of stage lighting that's going on in the background, and the way that the light is cast onto the guitarist from the side, and the way that you can tell that he is really working for this concert, because he is just dripping sweat. Like, this is a photo where the texture of the image really complements the subject very well. This is an absolutely gritty photo. Really wonderful image composition. I love the way that it's dark along the bottom, so it feels like you're in the midst of a crowd, right? Maybe those are people's heads in front of you. It's impossible to say. But it really does place you as the viewer in this concert. And yeah, that is a strikingly well done photo. And just, man, yeah, if I had taken this photo, it would absolutely be in my best photos of the year book. So thank you everybody for watching through this video. This was the new subject video, and we will be back tomorrow at the same time to talk about the one role, one subject entries.